Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this mini masterclass, How to Write a Kai Paper. It is Saturday morning, my time, Eastern time in Canada, but I'm excited that people from around the world are joining us today. And um, I think we have a special group of Sekai from the Sekai special interest group in Greece. So very excited that we'll be there as part of the World Usability Day. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I'm just gonna pop that in this chat. And I can see there are a couple of you joining us as well from, I can't type apparently. There are a couple of us coming from other parts of the world, and I think it's pretty late there, but we'll try to get through everything with the little amount of time that we have. Just a little bit of structure. Let me just pop over and get you my slides. Here we go. Just a little bit of structure for today's mini masterclass. We will be talking for about 30 minutes, and you're all very welcome throughout the masterclass to pop your questions in the chat. So just send your questions in the YouTube chat, and I will do my best to collect them towards the end, and we'll be engaging in a bit of a discussion. So I know that as part of your event, if you're joining us from Greece, from Athens, hello everyone. So if you're joining us from that special event, please know that even though this is scheduled for half an hour, you can stay a little bit longer, or you can take this somewhere else with your YouTube. If you're just a regular person joining us, absolutely welcome to stay and pop your questions in the chat. I'll do my best to answer all of them, and I'll be collecting them. So thank you again so much for making the time and tuning in with us today. And just so that we can see, so there are people from Greece. Maria's organizing this part of the World Usability Day. It's amazing to see you all there. The Greek Kai group. Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for joining in and being a part of this. Amazing. Okay, so before, without further ado, let's get started with this mini masterclass. So first, I want to give you a little bit of an overview of who I am and why it is interesting listening to me. Some of you might already know me as part of my work for Sekai, as well as my work online as part of building this knowledge base, huge knowledge base on social media about how to write papers. So my name is Lennart Nacke. I'm a professor, full professor, and I am also a university research chair at the University of Waterloo, where I study human-computer interaction. Those of you that are part of my newsletter know this. You know that I'm originally from Germany, that I like chocolate and karaoke, and I've also done a lot of service in the last 15 years as part of this work for Sekai. So what we're doing is we're trying to demystify this process. As you can see here, I've been, chairing conferences. I've been a papers chair. I've been a technical program chair. I have just retired from being an associate editor, and I've published many, many papers at different types of Kai and Sekai conferences. So there's a lot of knowledge that has come together in the last couple of years on how to do this stuff. So again, super excited that I get to share some of that with you. And I thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. So for those of you that are not familiar with Kai, now I know a large portion of the people that are tuning in to today's webinar might be familiar with Kai. This might be the reason why you're here. Kai is essentially, in our field, in human-computer interaction, one of the biggest conferences that we have. And it's quite exciting to be publishing in this conference. The next conference that's coming is the one in Japan in Kai 2025. And again, CHI stands for the Conference of Human Factors in Computing System, organized by the Association for Computing Machinery, the special interest group for human interaction. This is the SIG-CHI group. And so this is essentially the most impactful HCI conference that we have in our field. If you go to Google Scholar, you will see that this is highly indexed, the H5 index. So you can look up these different indexes in Google Scholar. You can see that it has an H5 index of 129. And specifically, hey, Vivek, if you're a newbie to CHI, this stuff might all be super new to you. But let me tell you that this means it has a huge impact. It's almost twice the impact of the top HCI journal, which is IJHCS, which is the journal that I was an editor in the past couple of years. Top journal, really great journal. IJHCS stands for International Journal of Human Computer Studies. Now, this is another top journal, but even that journal is about half of the impact of the papers that you publish at CHI. So obviously, CHI is a big conference venue, very exciting conference venue for people to be publishing their work in. And it's extremely selective for its papers. Got 26.3% acceptance rate. So this is from last year. So you get about 4,000 submissions. You get about 1,000 of those submissions getting in. It's a massive conference every year. It's between 4,000 to 5,000 attendees. So it's a huge gathering of anyone that's interested in that space of HCI. But it is also a bit different from the other conferences that you might be submitting to if you are working in the field of human-computer interaction. Now, CHI is sort of a mixed bag. It has a little bit of everything. I think last time we counted in 2024, it was 22 subcommittees. That number is, of course, fluctuating as new subcommittees are added. Some subcommittees are being split because there's too much demand. And so essentially what CHI is trying to do, it's trying to cater to all of these different old and new areas that you find within the human-computer interaction community. And it essentially is a condensed review cycle that you would find in the top journals in the field. So here, what we can see is we have a first round of reviews where we go into a revise and resubmit cycle. So some of you might not make it into that first round of reviews. So this is sort of a broad comb, if you want. We, of course, have also like desk rejects and other things that happen really quickly. But out of all the papers that come in, from the papers that are being judged, there is a first broad selection of what papers make it into the revise and review. And of course, in today's lecture, as best as we can in the little time that we have, we'll talk about some of these criteria. And then out of those, we get into the 26% that actually make it into an accept an A, as it's called in the PCS submission system, which is where these papers get submitted. And one of the things to keep in mind here is that we have different paper types. So we've got the short paper types. This makes up a very small portion of papers submitted to CHI. These are less than 5,000 words. Now, in these short papers, they used to be called notes a while ago. These short papers really have to have a strong contribution. And so with the contribution that you are trying to make, it's of course harder, as you know from some of the famous people in the literature, it's much harder to condense your contribution into 5,000 words, right? It has to be very succinct. There's no room for too much talking and other things. Like you have to be very succinct and very to the point to get your paper through there. Then we have the regular papers, the full-length papers. They're around 8,000 words, 8,000, 9,000 words, which is a nicely digestible paper. A lot of the stuff that I talk about specifically in my course, now you see the link here at the bottom, chicourse.com. So if you're really interested in learning in depth what this all means, you can always go to that website. I'll mention it a couple of times in my presentation, and you can check out the full course that I offer with in-depth guide for how to build these full-length papers. And then we've got the third criteria, which is excessively long papers. This is a tricky bit. So most papers fall into the full-length category because as you're becoming excessively long, you have to make a justification that justifies why you have so much content in your paper and why that's good for people. It's also one of the things to keep in mind, reviewers have very little time. So as you're going past 12,000 words, you're requesting a reviewer to essentially put more time into reviewing your paper. So always put yourself in the reviewer's shoes. If they now have to invest more time into assessing your paper, that's more time taken out of their day. And as you know, time equals money, essentially, for a lot of us. It just means this is much, much harder to justify that this is happening. And a lot of the reviewers will become a little bit grumpy once you hit that 12,000 mark. So most of our papers that we submit are around the 10,000, 11,000. We've had an excessively long paper in the past as well. It was a very in-depth literature review that eventually got rejected and actually just got accepted to Tokai. Check it out. It's an umbrella review of how to do literature reviews in HCI. Really cool paper. Rogers et al. Check it out. So we also now have this mandatory video part of the Kai acceptance. So here we have, after we've been accepted, we have the obligation to actually create a video of our paper. So it's not just we have to present it at the conference anymore, but we also have to create these in-depth, exciting videos. So it's a little bit of extra work that comes into that if you compare that to a regular submission. So if you've just submitted 2 journals before and you're not used to submitting something in this type of conference format, keep in mind that conferences come with a little bit of extra work attached in the HCI field. So not only is it fun, this is a big reason for people to submit to Kai, to travel to an exotic place and present your paper, even though, caveat, most of the time you will spend inside of a conference center and you won't actually get to see a lot of the nice parts of the places that you travel to. So keep that in mind if you're a PhD student and this is one of your main drivers there. But back to this workload thing here. So mandatory videos are required, and it's a good way for you to practice your presentation as you're putting that in. And then you focus on design guidelines as an outcome. This is quite often. So quite interesting to see what can we do here in terms of outcomes, in terms of outputs that will be available to folks. And so empirical studies are still the biggest category. And empirical studies means you have to run a study based on a research question, and then you create some sort of contribution. And yes, as Vivek is saying right now, Kai 2026 is in Barcelona. The current one is in Japan, and it's too late to submit to that. But mid-September is the deadline for Barcelona. It's going to be a very exciting Kai. Every time it goes to Europe, we have a lot of attendance. It's definitely going to be a great, a massive Kai, and so it's quite exciting to see. And yes, Maria said it's too late to submit, but you can start prepping for 2026, and it'll be an amazing conference, I'm sure. Okay, so wait, we already had that. Here we go. What are the elements of academic writing? So one of the things to keep in mind as you're writing a Kai paper or any academic paper really is to write well. And again, a lot of the stuff that I teach online, if you are in my newsletter, lennartnacke.com, you will see a lot of these essays that I publish every week. They're all about how to write clearly, concisely, and with precision. You always want to argue for the best possible contributions that you can make. And it has to be evidence-based. So again, you can have the best possible writing. If you don't have data and references, you will not be able to publish a paper. And there's usually a very structured format that we have for these papers. This is, in other fields, it's called IMRAD. For us, it should be called IRMRAD because we have this related work section in there. But essentially, you have an abstract, and it's kind of scaffolded. It's almost like a fractal, like a Fibonacci kind of sequence, where you have the abstract, which is everything condensed in that little 150-word overview of your paper. You have the introduction, which again is everything condensed in that one section. Then you have the related literature, and we'll talk a lot about what goes into these sections towards the very end here. And the methodology, which again, if you're doing an empirical paper, you have to describe what you're actually doing. You have the results, the discussion, and then the conclusion. Now, don't forget that in your discussion section, you always want to also have a limitation section where you're not overly limiting yourself, but you have to say, this is the stuff or the scope within which our paper actually works. It has to be a formal tone and style, and use formal language and avoid colloquialisms as you might imagine. It's a formal endeavor that we're putting forward here. Okay. So what is most crucial for a Chi paper? Let's have a look at the review criteria that we find as peer reviewers when we go into reviewing Chi papers. We have to look at originality, significance, research quality, handling of prior work, and presentation. These are the criteria that are being given to a reviewer that reviews a Chi paper. So they have to look for what makes it original, what is the significance, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means when you're writing the paper. What is the research quality? So again, I mentioned before, the execution is a big part. So the quality of your evidence, not just you have evidence, but with what degree of confidence can I trust your evidence? That's a big part of this research quality bit. And then the handling of the prior work. Handling of the prior work, of course, means that you understand within which subfield of Chi, keep in mind 22 subcommittees, you are operating. So you understand the literature that is surrounding your work. You know how to situate it in that space. And then not to forget also the presentation. How well is it written? How clearly are you making your points? Are you beating around the bush? A lot of the stuff that I do in my coaching work. So yes, you can also book a personal one-on-one coaching session with me. And for that, just subscribe to my newsletter and you will get a quick email that tells you how to book a coaching session. And the students that I work with, a lot of the times we have to really work on this presentation bit. How do we actually understand the thing that you're trying to say? So a lot of times I have a discussion with them and they tell me this is what I actually wanted to say. And then I look at the paragraph and I say, yeah, but there is a lot of fluff around this that didn't need to be said. So let's cut it down to the most important bits. So you really have to make a legitimate, distinctive, clear-cut, and unique contribution to HCI. So that's the trick here, right? Really being distinct. And yeah, hi, Lita. Great to see you here. I know you're always on LinkedIn, so glad to see that you're joining. This also means that to make this legitimate, to make this valid contribution, you have to move the field forward a bit. So it cannot just be something that is completely repetitive. Yes, there is a place for doing more replication work in Chi, and there were subcommittees and groups that are kind of interested in that. But a lot of the stuff that gets accepted, and we're focusing really on the papers that get in, move the field forward in a way. It demonstrates a valid contribution that is not overclaimed. This is really the tricky bit, not to overclaim. Specifically, if you're a junior researcher, you bring a lot of passion to the field. You really want to make a big contribution, but you have to, and the reviewers will tell you, to rein it in a little bit so that you can demonstrate that it's valid and that it's novel or that it's engaging, but not too much, as in like this is not going to solve world hunger or something like that, unless you can actually pull that off in a Chi paper, which I doubt you can. And then also to present it in an engaging and easy to read way. Now this is again the last bit, to be very clear cut about it and to really work on this contribution bit. Now a thing that I see a lot in the papers I review recently is that people are tending towards this idea of bullet points, right? Like, so we have these bullet points at the very end where they think about, okay, here's a bullet point, here's a bullet point, this is my contribution. So they bullet point the contribution, then they end the introduction, because usually you find this contribution at the end of an introduction. And the tricky bit here is really you want to kind of summarize it at the very end in terms of how should we think or act differently. So it's great that you're making these contributions, and contributions are all about opportunities. So not just that you're filling certain gaps, but opportunities that are arising now in practice and research in the HCI space. That's a meaningful contribution. And so you should answer in the last sentence of your introduction, you should answer, how should we think or act differently? That's the big takeaway. Okay, so everything around this, of course, starts with an anchor, a hook, if you want. We call that a research question. Sometimes it is a formulated statement, then it becomes a hypothesis. But really, the big idea is, what do you want to find out to make better evidence-based decisions? So this is at the heart of everything. How do we make better evidence-based decisions? So evidence-based means that the question has to be specific. What exactly do you want to accomplish? It has to be clear. Will you have to explain the question. It has to be focused. Are you solving one problem or many? And it has to be practical or realistic. Is it possible to achieve? And actionable and measurable. How will you measure the success? So the evidence is essentially that measure of success. How do we say something is better than something else? How can we put that into a good context? So why am I stressing this research question bit so much? Because it usually influences your title. It influences everything else that goes into your paper. And it must be researchable. It must be arguable. It must be feasible and must be relevant to your topic. I have a whole mini discussion about this in some of the webinars that I've given before about research questions. And you can find some of that in my Kai course, of course. The idea is really to chose your methods after you've decided on that research question and that hypothesis, right? You can have either or, you can have both. A lot of people just settle on a research question, and the research question implies the measurements that you're about to take. And those measurements are, of course, then the methods that you're putting forward. So that's really the exciting bit here. But let's focus on what is actually the secret structure. And I know you're kind of holding on to your pace here. It's going really fast, but again, we only have that half hour. So I'm trying to make it really concise. The secret structure of every great paper is a threefold structure. So here we want to look at the context. What is the problem? What specific problem or challenge are we actually solving here? And why is this a significant problem in our field, right? Like who is affected by this problem? What are the current limitations or the gaps that are part of this problem? And what previous work has been done in this area? So don't pick a problem that somebody has already solved. So really finding that unique problem is the first thing you got to settle for yourself. Then you have to understand the content, the solution, really the specific method that you developed here to solve that problem. How does your approach solve this specific problem? What are the key components of your solution? And the techniques or methodologies, are they existing? Are they new? Are you presenting something fresh? Or are you using it in new ways? Or are you using very valid methods to find a new answer to this question? And how is it different from the existing solutions that are out there, which is essentially what makes your solution worth publishing? And then thinking about that obviously leads into the contribution bit. The solution leads into the contribution, which is all about the impact, right? We've got problem, solution, impact, or context, content, contribution, the 3 C's, as a lot of people call it, because it's an easier way and more handy way to relate to that. But it's really here about the specific measurable improvements that your solution provides and how your work advances this knowledge in the field, what the capabilities or opportunities are that you are enabling with this research, and the limitations that you are overcoming here. So a lot of that is really at the heart of understanding all of this and really looking at how do we create that future work at the end, right? Like how does our work advance the knowledge in the field, and what new questions does it open up so that we can find out more? Hello, Saif. Amazing that you're tuning in and part of this. So academic hourglass is sort of the structure within which this all operates. Again, I have a complete breakdown of the academic hourglass in my course, in the kaicourse.com, that you can see at the bottom here. And the hourglass structure is essentially 3 parts. So the beginning, the broad part, the middle, the narrow part, and then the broad part again. And this is really helpful to kind of see scope-wise how you're doing stuff. Now, I've gotten some feedback from people that are not necessarily in HCI saying, I never really understand how this structure works. And, you know, I think this is more of a feeling than an understanding here, because it's really like, it helped me a lot when I wrote my first paper to kind of think like establishing the broad context, narrowing down to my specific solution, and then reestablishing how that has some impact to my field is really, really a great guide to go into this. So I find this hourglass like a really nice way of handling all of that. Now, I talked earlier about IMRAD and what does IMRAD bring to the table? And again, in our case, it would be ILMRAD. Like I said, it's not, you know, the exact same structure that we can find in a lot of the research papers, but if we're looking at this hourglass again, right? Like the hourglass is essentially that structure. So the abstract is kind of the mini version of everything. It gets everything condensed. Then we have the introductions, always the setup. And I talk a lot about the CARS model in my newsletter, a lot in depth, of course, in my Kai course. But the CARS model is creating a research space. I'm not going to talk about it. We don't have enough time, but it's a really nice 3-step way of introducing an argument for your introduction section. It helps you really build powerful introductions. And then the lit review kind of sets everything up for the context within which you operate. And then methodology and results is usually what you write first, because methodology is, at least if you're in North America, you have to write the methodology to get research ethics clearance and so forth. And then the results come from your empirical study. Now, of course, I know there's other papers out there, but this is your standard empirical paper, which is the majority of the papers that gets accepted into Kai. So IMRAD here, we got the introduction. It's all about what's the issue, how and why should we solve this. If you can't answer the how and why, specifically the why, your introduction is no good. This is the hook that you need to bring. You need to tell us, why should we care? If I don't care at the end of paragraph 1, we have to redo it. We have to make people care. Then we're going into the literature review section, where we're setting the stage. We're telling everyone about the knowns and the unknowns. And that essentially sets us up to make a meaningful contribution. The methods are all about just what we did. The results are all about the results we got. And the discussion is all about how do the results solve the problem. So the discussion is all about contextualizing it again, linking it to your literature review where you've set that stage, and saying, okay, this solves the problem in that way. And for that, we need to link it back to the literature that has identified how the problem hasn't been solved. And now we're making this argument for solving that problem. Again, a lot of the coaching work that I do with my clients is exactly that. We're going into the discussion section. We're looking at what have you written and how can we solve that? And then we're solving that problem for them. A really, really powerful way to get to understanding some of these things in depth. So this is really one of the things that I highly recommend when you're struggling with some of these things, to think about, okay, how can I contextualize my findings again? And yeah, for those that are, because I just got a DM about how can I find that. So if you're interested in these coaching calls, here's a QR code that you can scan if you just want to hop right into booking one. Okay, so in the conclusion, there is also the idea of what does that mean for us going forward. Now, again, discussion usually has limitations, future work, and then goes into the conclusion section where it asks, okay, what does it mean for us going forward? How can we, make this all work? And again, you have all of this stuff set up inside of your abstract structure as well. So the abstract structure is essentially a mini version of this paper. So here we're essentially setting this up like a mini paper. We have 1 to 2 sentences talking about in which context the study is relevant. We're talking about what is the problem that you're solving or research gap that you are addressing, and why is your problem relevant, and why does it all matter, right? Like really thinking about how this all matters and unfolds together. The relevance, why did you do your research, what your proposed solution is, what you did, what you found out. Now, what you found out should be the majority of the abstract, because it's kind of the meat of what you're presenting. And then the contributions and takeaways, where you're thinking about how do your main results add to previous knowledge? What does it all mean when we're putting this stuff together? So this is really the highlight where that all comes together and everything just gets wrapped up nicely. So that brings us to the end of this. Again, if you want deeper training, there is the kaicourse.com. So maybe I can put that in a QR code as well. If people want to scan that, just give me a hot second. And there you can find everything in much deeper detail if you're interested. Let's just put that in there just real quick here, just add that. I do offer the in-depth training there where you can learn everything about Kai writing. We didn't have enough time. We're at the end of our 30 minutes here. There's a 9-step editing system in there. There's a 7-step review mindset. We have an in-depth review explanation in the course. I walk you through the back end of PCS. I explain you how this all works when you're submitting your paper, how you're kind of putting everything together as you're going through the submission system. And I really, with that process, try to alleviate any of the issues that you might have in there. Now, you might say, okay, this is something that takes too much time. I don't have the time to prep all of that. But really, what takes you, let's say, like 3 to 4 hours to complete that course will come back to you, as in, like, it will take you less time to actually write your paper. And, some people might say it's too expensive. Of course, here you have to think about the value of the time that you spend struggling with writing the papers. Now, if you, just get a help support there, you have to struggle less with the paper. So this is like a nice way of overcoming some of that, some of those issues. And of course, it helps you effectively communicate the knowledge that you already have, and you really get ahead of everyone else that's just struggling to understand how to put this stuff into context. So hopefully it'll help you get a little bit better at all of that. So now what I want you to do is pop in some questions. So let's see if I can find some questions here. Just have to find the right thing. So please send us your questions in the chat now, and I will go over some of them. Okay. So one question came in. Panos, yes, purchasing power parity will come in January. I have to redo the website. Unfortunately, Thinkific doesn't really have that option in the tier that I'm in. So absolutely, just email me and we can figure something out. In the meantime, there will be purchasing, or there is purchasing power parity, but the checkout system doesn't support that currently. So we're going to have to do a workaround for the time being. Okay, so any more questions from the group about writing Kai papers? So please pop those in. Feel free to connect, of course, but I would love to answer some of the questions that you have about the issues that come with writing these Kai papers. So, okay. So, yeah, I don't see any more questions. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things, maybe let's just pop over here. Yeah. Can we change that around? No. Here we go. There. Okay. So thanks so much for tuning in. And yeah, here we are collecting some questions. Perfect. Here's one from your experience. How far in advance do you suggest one begins preparing for their Kai submission? From Maria. So definitely one of the things that I recommend at the beginning of what I call the Kai cycle, which is essentially after Kai is before Kai. This is also when I see a lot of rising interest. So most of my courses sell in the summer because a lot of people are noticing, oh, I need to prep for my Kai submission. And so a lot of people will invest in training in May, June, which is also a good time to start thinking about your Kai paper. So at the beginning of Kai, you really, or at the end of Kai, you really want to start thinking about the next Kai. You want to start thinking about, okay, so how do I get into this next bit of progress here that I can actually support my paper in the best possible way. So one of the things that I recommend is to put at least a year into this planning process. Sometimes larger projects will take more time, so you need to have more preparation. But I would suggest you begin right after Kai is done. You begin your preparing and planning stage. If you're in North America, now you're in Greece. So in Greece, there might be a different system in terms of getting ethical approvals. In North America, you have to apply for ethics with your study design, which means you need to finalize your study design in the summer, apply for ethics or like in the first month, essentially, apply for ethics right away, and then run the study in June or July, right? Because the deadline is already September. What happens a lot, now I said after Kai is before Kai, I think probably better after Kai submission is before Kai submission would be a better way to put it, because essentially you want to give yourself that year. So you start thinking about it, I guess, in January, and then you start getting ethical clearance and all that stuff. You run the study in the summer. Sure, you can run it on a shorter review cycle. You come back from Kai, you have an idea, you run the study in the summer, you do the reviews quickly. But I would say the best way is to give yourself about a year in between. It gives you enough time to run the study, collect the results. Sometimes you run 2 studies, and that gives you enough time to write the paper. I'd say the paper writing part is essentially what takes the longest. And what I see a lot of papers are getting rejected for is they don't put enough time into the revision process. So you want to give yourselves at least a month, maybe 2, to revise together with your supervisor or together with a coach like myself, to revise that paper to get it into the best shape possible. I think that's really the key here. So getting a paper accepted for Kai is notoriously difficult. Traditionally accepted papers are very eloquently written. One can argue that it is easier nowadays to articulate one's work with LLMs. This is a really interesting question. Now, those of you that follow me on social media know I talk a lot about LLMs. We've also done quite a bit of research in the last year about how people think about, or our most recent study was about how reviewers think about LLM output. And as the studies are coming out, we see people have a hard time differentiating. The LLMs are getting better. I have a whole webinar on that teaches you, actually, maybe we can pop that in here. I have a whole webinar that teaches you on how to use these tools. There's stuff like consensus, SciSpace, Cite AI. Those are all tools that you can use that will actually find citations for you. One of the tricks, I guess, is that you have to know how to use them, because if you just use a plain old LLM, if you just use GPT-4 Mini or something like that, you will not get the results you're looking for. The output is very harmonized, and so yeah, it can support you in a way, but the tricky bit is to get it to a level where you can actually be confident in the output and you appreciate the output. So I think we're going to a model where people will have to declare that, of course, and we do have a paragraph that we put in the papers where we declare that we've used an LLM to create the output. From what I'm reading, even the reviews that I'm reading, everything is LLM enhanced, right? Like I'd say a solid 80 to 90% of the reviews that I read as an associate editor or whenever I chair something are LLM at least enhanced, like if not generated. The trick is really to use it properly, like giving it some of the source materials correctly to work with and then edit the output. So you can't just be like, write a random review for something. Like that's a disaster. That's the worst thing you can do. And that's also maybe not plagiarism, but it's absolutely unethical when it comes to your behavior in the academic community, right? So proper ethical use of an LLM can actually be beneficial, specifically if English is not your first language. Is it something that will give away that you have used that? Absolutely. It's not something you can hide. Specifically, again, depending on model output, I would, and I talk about that in the AI Research Tools webinar, I would always suggest daisy chaining together some tools, really working on a very intricate prompt, a very detailed prompt. And recently, and I think I'll do a webinar on that soon as well, it's also this idea of Claude projects, custom GPTs, Perplexity spaces, and Gemini gems. These are all things where you can custom string that together. And you've seen it in Notebook LM to some degree, where you can upload PDFs and examples of your writing, and it can really help you generate better results. So this is a way, I think, where you can think about that. One of the things that always comes up when talking about LLMs, you have to also ask yourself ethically, where do you stand on that question? Now, if you attended the last Kai, you've seen, I think, Kate Lawson, the main keynote, which was also about the carbon impact of using LLMs on our planet. So there are things ethically that you have to ask yourself. There is a huge impact on energy consumption, and specifically as we are in a climate crisis, you have to ask yourself, how much of that do I want to use? And should I just like generate away, or should I be more conscious and specific about it? I think a conscious specific use is probably the best way to go here, because everything that we do has an impact, and nothing is in isolation. So I do think it's important to kind of ask yourself these questions as you're engaging with an LLM. It can't just be like, it's there, I got to use it. I mean, that's definitely the case. It's not going to go away, but ask yourself where you stand on that issue before you blindly run into using an LLM for everything. Okay, so that's my stance on that. Do you believe that it becomes even harder to get a paper accepted because the engaging form can distract and deceive reviewers as to the quality of the contribution? That is, I think, one of the most pertinent questions that we see coming in for reviewing papers, or for looking at Kai versus other publication venues. Now, the big issue, of course, for Kai is that salesmanship that you have to put in here, right? So definitely, you're putting in a salesmanship, but you have to do that ethically, I guess. So in theory, you could do it unethically, right? In theory, if you're very good, and I do think I've definitely seen papers that are just very good at writing and packaging. But I think you see that everywhere. You see that in a lot of the stuff that we deal with whenever we work with products, digital products, whenever we work with even YouTube videos and stuff like that. The thumbnail, is super important. In the same way, the title, the introduction, the abstract is kind of like a YouTube thumbnail. It kind of gives you that packaging of your paper. And obviously, you'd hope that the peer reviewers actually will note some of the flaws in the execution. The reality of it is, a lot of the peer reviewers will not redo your statistics. They will not go to the level of depth that is required to really thoroughly assess everything. But I do think red flags stick out pretty quickly. Some underreporting, overreporting, some issues that might happen as you're reporting something incorrectly. Senior reviewers will catch that really quickly and call you out for it. So you can't just submit nonsense, right? But one of the things that we've seen in the past is sort of this trickling down effect. So people just submitted, I think this was one of the senior people in Kai that was talking or boasting about this online. It's like, I submitted the same paper for 10 years and it finally got accepted into Kai, something like that. You've all read the stories on Facebook and whatnot. The thing really is, it's not the same paper, right? Like if you do 10 years of revisions on your paper, sure, it'll eventually get accepted because you finally get that packaging right. Because yes, the acceptance bit, I think, is a lot about packaging for Kai. But that also tells you, if you have a good paper and you don't package it right, it will not get in. Again, the trick in my Kai courses and everything that I do in my newsletter and everything where I teach is helping you to get to that better level of packaging. I assume that you are a good researcher, and I will, of course, show you how to do that as well. But at the end of the day, the thing that will make that difference is, of course, that packaging. So is it a good thing? I don't know. I don't know if it's a good thing. It's definitely a helpful thing in terms of impact that Kai can do for a larger community. But is it a good thing in terms of, that it opens the doors to some distraction and deception? It does, right? Everything is a balance. So everything comes with opportunities and downsides here. I don't think it is all bad. I do think there's a lot of good about the form of the papers and the engaging form of the papers. But I do understand that there is some degree of, if you're really smooth, you will enhance your chances. Now, at the end of the day, peer review is just only one of the measures that we have to determine paper quality. A lot of the times, what the people in a committee will say is, when in doubt, let the literature sort it out. So there will be sort of this push to be more positive when you're an associate chair, and to kind of see, yeah, maybe we can get it and get this paper in. And then, if the paper is bad, it just won't get cited, or it will get cited in a negative context. At the end of the day, I do still believe in some of that self-regulation of academia, that the literature will eventually say, this is actually a good paper, this is not such a good paper. But in a world, with overly massive amount of publications that are out there, it is definitely becoming trickier. And I do think even after your paper is published, it is still about salesmanship of the paper, because the people that post a lot about their paper on social media, that talk about it on podcasts, that try to advertise it. I'm actually currently in what you could say an advertising run for our the Great AI Witch Hunt paper, which is that paper where we studied reviewer perceptions of LLM generated outputs. And that paper recently just got a lot of media attention, that also we can see the impact on the citations. So it is actually leading to more citations, which is something that is also quite beautiful. So I do think that's something to really, really keep in mind, that a paper doesn't exist in isolation anymore. Those days in the early last century, where it was just enough to have the paper and to make that available, are kind of gone. So you do have to think beyond just the paper. If you want citations, if you want sort of that impact, you don't have to, of course, have that impact, but it's something to keep in mind there. Okay. We had one more question about what model of literature review is essential. Now, maybe we can get a little bit more follow-up. I'll try to interpret that as best as I can. But what I consider essential when doing a literature review, I don't think there's necessarily like a standard model that you have to follow, but there is, of course, the core things that you need to include in this literature review bit. Now, please keep in mind, when I talk about literature review, I don't talk about a systematic literature review. That's a separate paper in its own. But I talk about the related work section in a research paper. So in this case, when we're doing this literature review model in the related work section, which hopefully that is what you meant, Vasilis. If not, please correct me and say I actually wanted to know about the systematic literature review that we have in full papers. But if this is what you mean, then the minimum that we have to put in that related work section is a talk about the variables of the experiment. So if we're doing a comparison study, we have usually some independent variables where we're talking about comparing condition A, B, C, or whatever it is. We do some empirical comparison, and that is usually related to the research question. So the research question gives you the guidance for your related work section. It tells you, well, these are the two things that I'm comparing. This is what the literature has said about thing A. This is what literature has said about thing B. And here we have more details about what's lacking. Then you would go into what is usually the second part of your research question, as in like, how does XY affect AB? Or how does AB affect XY, whatever it is. So you usually have some predictive variables and some outcome variables, right? And so those outcome variables are the things that you're measuring, as in like, I do a lot of physiological measures. So usually I would have in those papers, I would have a section about physiological measures in HCI or physiological measures in games. This is what we know. This is what's being used. And then I would explain that. So your lit review needs to set that up. It needs to set up the context, the theoretical context of the comparison that you're making. And it needs to set up the empirical context of the studies that you're conducting. So ideally, you kind of set both of them up in depth in that lit review, and that hopefully, really helps you get that done. Okay, I think that's what I currently have for questions. Perfect. Okay, this is what Vasilis meant. So definitely let me know if you have any more questions. I'll be here for another couple of minutes. If not, then I'm also, I could ask myself a question. If not, then I would also say thank you very much for your attention. If you want to know more about this stuff, again, maybe I can switch these around again, pop that up here. These are my contact details. I'm now also on Blue Sky. So if you go at lennartnacke.com, you can find me on Blue Sky as well, because apparently lots of academics have moved over there. I'm on YouTube. You're on YouTube right now, so you can see me there and follow me there if you like. Also TikTok and Instagram, LinkedIn, definitely send me a request there. And you can also reach me at this email address, or you can, again, scan that QR code up here if you are interested in this Kai course. again, consider this an investment in your entire academic career. It's not just one paper, but it's really an investment in terms of not having to hire editors or other people to help you get that stuff done. Okay. I see we have one more question. Let's pop that up in here. Advice for writing a strong discussion section. Yeah. So again, unfortunately, that's like a longer that's like a longer thing to talk about. But let me just give you sort of the Cliff's Notes version of this to write a good discussion. So at the heart of it, a discussion is you contextualizing your results in the related literature. So one of the things you absolutely want to do is say how what you found out has an impact on the things that you've set up in the related works. So a good way to do that is to classify your results in subsections that you have available there, and then relate those subsections. Again, headers are super important, structuring is super important. Relate each of these outcomes that you have there back to the related literature, and then wrap it all up nicely with a little tangible advice framework, you could say. That's what I meant with that we're so guidelines focused. A lot of the times you find design guidelines or suggestions or something like that. Again, it needs to make sense. You can't just make design guidelines for design guidelines sense, but a lot of the times people are looking for a takeaway. So relating your findings to the related work and describing that you have some sort of output there, and there's a way that another researcher could use that. Chef's kiss, right? Like that's really what you want to do and how you want to make that tangible for people. So it's all about this sort of tangible output. Again, lots more to talk about there, but that's sort of the gist of it if you want to sort of get the short version of that. Okay, I do think our friends in Greece want to go to the parties, I guess. Please have some delicious drinks for me, and hopefully you're celebrating at the end of your long day of Sekai related work. And thanks for everyone else around the world that tuned in today. It's really great to see some of you here virtually. So it was fantastic that you made the time. I really appreciate all of that. And thank you so much for tuning in. And I will see you in my newsletter. If you don't have the time to sign up for the Kai course, absolutely check out my newsletter. And I will see you every Tuesday, every week. So thanks again so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. And yeah, I will